Hello, Kent. Good Erev Shabbos to you as well.
Good, thanks, Rabbi. You well?
Yeah. Thank God.
Rabbi, are you having Friday night services at your shul?
I am.
Yeah.
Baruch Hashem.
Okay, no, we haven't started yet Friday nights.
And you?
No, we've got tomorrow morning, but no, not tonight yet.
Yeah, listen, it's it's very hard because people aren't coming as quick as we would have hoped. So
yeah.
Okay, so we got quite a bit of material to cover today. And I'm sure over the last 2 days, everybody's gotten a clear picture of the difference between the apologies for the background noise. You got a clear picture of the difference between what you commonly refer to as an Eruv and what we're studying about here. Right? There's 3 different types of Eruv. There's an Eruv of properties, there's an Eruv of people, and there's an Eruv of time, space, and spirit, basically. Eruv of time. So the Eruv around Sea Point, for example, is not what we are learning about here. Well, or I should say, is that Michelle? Okay, welcome. We have Michelle joining us from Chabad of Nashville. Michelle, just say, I'm not sure if you know who I am, but I'm Rabbi Posner's grandson. So it's a bit of...
wow, that's fantastic. I had no idea.
My mother was born in Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, I'm in Zambia at the moment and missing my shul, and it's being in Zambia is very different than Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah, it is. It's a little different, Zambia and Nashville.
But thank you so much for the link and the join and the opportunity to participate.
More than welcome. So, so the Eruv around Sea Point is essentially taking all of the many different properties, but more importantly, taking the semi-public domain, which is Main Road Sea Point, and making them all into one property. Here we're doing something else. The Eruv we've been learning about for the last 2 days. That's what's called an Eruv Chatzeris. Not around Sea Point, but within a hotel itself or within an apartment block. Many people aren't even aware of this, that if you're living in an apartment block, well, you can just carry because there's an Eruv. No, there's an Eruv, that's true, but it belongs to different people. And Shlomo HaMelech instituted, as we learned 2 days ago, that they need to have a sense of shared ownership over the shared space. And that's the meal which they put together, either everyone or 2 or 3 representatives of everyone, and then the space becomes shared to the extent that you can carry from one domain to another. So today, it's quite a lengthy chapter. So we have one of 2 options. We're going to be learning for about a half an hour. We can either go briefly through everything, sort of skim through, and then you can look at it more in depth on your own, or we can go through it more thoroughly, and then you can make up the rest of the chapter on your own. So whoever's brave enough to type their vote into the chat box, would you prefer everything or a few more in depth? You can type to me properly, just so we know what we're doing today. Do I get any votes? We got 50-50. We got 2 towards in-depth. Okay. Sorry, John. Oosh. Sorry, we're back to 50-50. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through everything, but I'm going to try and take at least one or two halachas, which the Rebbe says you should do one or two. I mean, when the Rebbe says in depth, he doesn't mean the way we're doing. It means properly in depth, but at least get through the basic principles. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, as you can see here, from the in fact, I'll go off screen for a second. What we're going to talk about today is the connection between courtyards or between spaces when there's an open space, meaning when is it considered open and when is it considered that there's already a shared space. There's a very well-known story. This group of people learning Rambam here is a nice mix of Hasidim and those who would identify. I don't want to use the word Litvak because many Litvaks are Hasidim, but from the Briska methodology of study. There's a very well-known story of the Rebbe's father, Rebbe Yitzchak Schneerson, who went for a smicha exam to Reb Chaim Brisker. And Reb Chaim, of the great, Soloveitchik dynasty, for a Soloveitchik to give a smicha to a Schneerson wasn't a simple matter. So he said, I want you to sit in my study with me. And as the shilas come in, I want you to give me answers, what you think I should tell people. And based on how he would produce answers, he would decide if to give him smicha or not. There was quite a few things that came through, but one of them was over Yom Tif. It was actually on Sukkot. Sukkot night, a group of people came with a big problem. What happened? They live in a courtyard. The first night Sukkot was Shabbos. They live in a courtyard, and there was a big sukkah built in the courtyard. But what wasn't made was an eruv, permitting everyone to carry into the courtyard. And now it's Yom Tov already, and it's Shabbos, and you're not allowed to make this inclusive meal that you're supposed to create before Shabbat that transforms all of the individual inhabitants of the courtyard or leading into the courtyard into this collective. This transformative meal wasn't put together before Shabbat, Yom Tiv, and now no one can eat in the sukkah. And you can't eat in your house, and you can't eat in the sukkah, and the food's in the houses. What are they going to do? So he puts the Shaila to Reb Leivik to think of what sort of an ingenious eruv can they come up with. He says, no, very simple. The sukkah itself is ma'ariv. The sukkah includes them all into the collective. The fact that they built the sukkah together. Why am I telling you this story? Why am I wasting our precious minutes on a story? Because it's indicative of all of the halachas that we're going to learn today. In other words, we're going to learn about elements either in the construction or in the separation between them of what does or doesn't make them into a collective from this chatzir. Okay. So let's go. If there's a window, if there's a window between two courtyards, if the window is 4 handbreadths by 4 handbreadths or larger, and it's within 10 handbreadths of the ground, whether it's almost entirely above 10 handbreadths and only a small portion is within, or almost entirely within, only a small portion is above, an option is granted to the inhabitants of the courtyards. Is that they have an option. What's the option? That if they desire to join in a single eruv, they may. Why? Because this, in other words, the window causes the entire area to be considered a single courtyard. And carrying is permitted from one courtyard to the other. If they desire, they may make 2 eruvim, each for the inhabitants of their respective courtyard. It is then forbidden to carry from one courtyard to the other. So it's up to them what they want to do. The size of the window, by the way, is not a square 16 handbreadths. It's precisely 4 by 4, meaning both sides of the window have to have at least 4. So if it's 2 by 8, it's not enough. Why? Because it has to be a window which is big enough, the minimum that a body can fit through. Here in Africa, we know that even quite small windows, people can get into your properties. So even 4 handbreadths by 4 handbreadths. If the windows are smaller than 4 handbreadths to 4 handbreadths, or the entire window is above 10 handbreadths on the ground, they may make 2 eruvim each for the inhabitants of their respective courtyard. In other words, it's not enough of a connection between the two. When does the above apply to a window between 2 courtyards? So you have 2 collective spaces, they are permitted to make a native. When by contrast the window lies between 2 houses, then they're permitted to make a native even if the window is above 10 handbreadths from the ground. And as he explains here in the commentary, that a house is considered as if it is full, and thus if there were less than 10 handbreadths between the window and the ground. So therefore, they're able to do that. Similarly, when there's a window between a house and a loft, if the inhabitants desire to establish a single native, they may, even if there's not a ladder leading to the window, provided the window is 4 handbreadths by 4 handbreadths. If the window is round and it can circumscribe a square that has 4 handbreadths, it's considered as if it were square. In other words, if it's big enough, it's enough of a connecting passage between the 2 spaces, whether it's individuals or collectives. Gimel, when there is a wall or a mound of hay. Now, just to point out, what's interesting here is that the laws of Erev are about creating a sense of community, taking individual homes and making them into a sense of community. Now, you might think, well, yeah, but all the prohibitions make it harder for neighbors to share food, etc., etc. That's true. But when we make an effort to highlight our unity, that creates a stronger and more sustainable sense of community spirit. When there is a wall or a mound of hay that is less than 10 handbreadths high between 2 courtyards, they must make a single eruv and may not make 2 eruvim. If the wall or mound is 10 or more handbreadths high, they must make 2 eruvim, each for the respective courtyard. Again, because depending on the height of this mound, either they are considered together or separate. If there's a ladder on either side of the wall, it's considered to be an entrance. And if they desire, they can establish a single eruv, even if the ladder is standing upright next to the wall and it's possible to ascend it without moving its lower portion away from the wall. So it's up against the wall proper. It's not in a position to climb. It permits them to participate in a single eruv. Moreover, even if the top of the ladder doesn't reach the top of the wall, if there are less than 3 handbreadths between them, it permits them to participate in a single eruv if they desire. In other words, the spaces are considered potentially one, and the eruv can bring that potential into its actual reality. Dalet, if the wall is 4 handbreadths wide and a ladder is positioned on either side of the wall, they may make a single eruv if they desire. If the wall is not 4 handbreadths wide and there are less than 3 handbreadths between the 2 ladders, they then may make a single eruv because of the proximity of the 2 spaces. But if there are more than 3 handbreadths between the ladders, they must make 2 eruvim. In other words, if the separation between the 2 ladders and the wall is that much, then you have to make each one its own eruv. So consider 2 separate eruvei chatzer, 2 separate courtyards. The following rules apply when one builds a bench above a bench at a side of the wall separating 2 courtyards. Okay, so it's almost like a semi ladder. If the lower bench is 4 handbreadths high, we consider it as if the height of the wall were reduced. If the lower bench is not 4 handbreadths high, but there are less than 3 handbreadths between it and the upper bench, we consider it as if the height of the wall were reduced. Because of the proximity between them, then they're considered one. In such situations, if the inhabitants of the courtyards desire, they may make a single eruv, and similar principles apply regarding wooden steps placed close to a wall, that if they are close enough to each other, it's considered one space. Now, what about if something is sticking out? This is in the next halacha, Vav, Kaisel Gavaya, and there's a high wall separating 2 courtyards, and a projection protrudes from the middle of the wall. If less than 10 cubits remain from the projection of the top of the wall, one may lead a ladder in front of the projection. So it's considered a part of the wall, and a ladder leading up to it is already good. And this grants the inhabitants the option of making a single eruv. If, however, one stands the ladder against the wall at the side of the projection, we do not consider it as if the height of the wall were reduced, meaning that it has to be able to reach the top of the wall and not just this part of the wall that's sticking out. If the wall is 19 handbreadths high, it is sufficient to have a projection protrude for the inhabitants to have the option of making a single eruv. Why? For there are less than 10 handbreadths in the earth to the projection, less than handbreadths from the projection on top of the wall. So therefore, neither of the wall has that minimal space of 10 tfachim. If you remember from the laws of Shabbos, 10 handbreadths, which is, according to some opinions, it's approximately 40 inches, which is just over a meter. That's considered the immediate space of earth, the air rights, so to speak. Now, there are times when an air zone goes up infinitely. Tumah, for example, goes up no matter how high it is. But Rishus HaRabba in the public domain, or here the semi-public domain of a courtyard, is only up to the 10 cubits. Were the wall to be 20 handbreadths high, 2 projections are required for the inhabitants to have the option of establishing a single eidav. Moreover, projections may not be parallel to each other. In this way, there will be less than handbreadths between lower projection and the ground, and less than handbreadths in the upper projection and the top of the wall. Now, moving on to another way of reducing the height of this separation, allowing for the chotzer to be more of a collective. If a date palm is chopped down and inclined from the earth to the top of a wall, so it's basically a slope, a ladder. The inhabitants have the option of establishing a eidav, and it is not necessary for them to make it a permanent part of the structure. Similarly, the very weight of a ladder can cause it to be considered as having been placed permanently. It is not necessary to affix it to the structure. If it's there, it's considered enough to connect. If the divider separating 2 courtyards is made of straw, the inhabitants may not make a single eidav, although there are ladders on either side. Why? Because a person will not ascend the ladder because nothing is supporting it. If the ladders are in descent or leaning on a firm support, and there's straw on either side, the inhabitants have the options of making 2 eidavim. Ches. When there's a tree at the side of the wall, and it was used as a ladder for the wall, the inhabitants have the option of making a single eidav. Although it is forbidden to ascend a tree on Shabbos, why? Since the prohibition is only a shavus, in other words, a rabbinic prohibition, so the sages therefore have the authority to lift the prohibition, and this does not cause the option to be denied. If an ashera, which is a type of tree, which was used for idolatry, and it was prohibited to have, it's been made to serve as ladder for the wall. Why? The inhabitants do not have the option of making a single eidav, for ascending the ashera is forbidden by the Torah, since one is forbidden to derive any benefit from it. So in other words, an idolatrous ladder, it seems strange to us, obviously, is not able to make something permitted. The following rules apply when a wall is 10 handbreadths high and the inhabitants desire to tear down a portion of the wall to reduce its height, so they will establish a single of the eidav. Right? Let's say they want to make the wall lower for exactly this reason. So then they have the option of establishing a single eidav, provided the portion whose height that reduces at least 4 handbreadths long. If the inhabitants of one of the adjoining courtyards tear down a portion of their side of the wall, so less than 10 handbreadths high, they are granted permission to use the shorter portion of the wall, and the remainder of the wall that is high is divided between the inhabitants of both courtyards, meaning that they both share it. Yud, nifratz hakaisel. What if it's breached? A high wall between the courtyards is breached. If the breach is 10 cubits wide or less, they may still establish 2 eidavim. Okay? Now, why would anybody want to establish 2 eidavim? Make 1. We keep going here. They are allowed to establish 2 eidavim. What he means is that, what he's getting to whenever the Rambam says that, is that when you have everybody in the courtyard together, like in a body corporate, if there's enough people that want to make a problem, they can. So when they are required to make 1 eruv, then the people in one courtyard are bound to the mood swings of the people in the other courtyard. And we don't want to make the eruv this week. We want to stop the eruv. So that's why he's saying you're able to make 2. In other words, you don't need to include them, and you're able to assert your autonomy in establishing this eruv on your side. If the breach is less than 10 cubits wide and one desires to make it more than 10 cubits, it is necessary. Whoa, sorry there. Jump down by me. It is necessary to hollow out a portion of the wall 10 handbreadths high. When this is done, the only option remaining is to establish a single eruv. At the outset, if one desires to open a breach larger than 10 cubits in the wall, it is necessary that the height of the breach be equivalent to that of an ordinary person. In other words, you feel that it's open between the two of you. When there is a trench at least 10 handbreadths deep and at least 4 handbreadths wide between two courtyards, it is necessary for the inhabitants to establish 2 eruv. If its dimensions are less than this, the inhabitants must establish a single eruv. They do not have the option of establishing 2 eruv. If the depth of the trench is reduced, okay, so here, what we're saying is, it's not the height that's separating the two courtyards, it's the depth of the trench between them that's separating two courtyards, okay? So if it's less than 10 handbreadths deep and 4 handbreadths wide, you don't have to, it's fine, it's one courtyard. But if it's reduced by adding earth or pebbles, the inhabitants must establish a single eruv. They do not have the option of establishing 2 eruv. And you're in this together, the trench doesn't separate. So it can be assumed that the earth and stones were intended to become a permanent part of the trench. If, by contrast, when reduce the depth of the trench by adding straw or hay, the reduction is not significant unless one actually intends they become a permanent part of the trench. Similarly, if one reduces the width of the trench with a board or with reeds by placing them across the entire length of the trench, meaning not blocking the width, but across the length, the inhabitants again must establish single eruv. They do not have the option of establishing 2 eruv because essentially the whole presence of the separation has been removed. Any entity that may be carried on the Shabbos, examples given, a basket or a cup, is not considered to reduce its depth unless one affixes it to the earth firmly in such a manner that one must dig with a spade to dislodge it. In other words, minimizing the trench needs to be done with that intention. Nasa Nuach, when places a board that is at least 4 handbreadths wide across the trench, the board is considered to be an entrance. Okay? If it's a cross, but then it's a bridge. Therefore, the inhabitants may establish a single eruv. This is if it's across the width, not the length, obviously. They also have the option of establishing 2 eruv, but now it's totally connected. Similar rules apply when 2 balconies are positioned opposite each other across the public domain, and a board is extended from one balcony to the other. The inhabitants may establish a single eruv. If you have a bridge going across two apartment buildings, they also have the option of establishing 2 eruv, each one for his own balcony. If 2 balconies are on the same side of the public domain, but are not at the same height, instead of one is higher than the other, the following rules apply. If they're within 3 handbreadths of each other, they are considered to be a single balcony. The inhabitants may establish only a single eruv. If they are more than 3 handbreadths apart, they must establish 2 eruv, each one for his own balcony, because again, they're considered 2 entirely separate domains. Any questions? Okay. I'm not an auctioneer, by the way.
Why would if I've got 2 balconies for 2 adjoining apartments, why would I want to create a single eruv? I'm not going to move from balcony to balcony.
Oh, but it's 2 different property, 2 different owners. Well, I would move from one balcony to the other. Why not? If I can. Well, why would I not move from one balcony to the other?
Because that's not in my property.
It's my friend. My kids want to go play with each other, with their friend. They want to bring their toys from one to the other.
Okay,
Tesla 50.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. Thank you.
The following rule applies when between 2 courtyards there's a wall 4 handbreadths wide, which is 10 handbreadths high from one courtyard at ground level at the second courtyard. Okay? So you have a wall here, but it's ground level for the other courtyard. So one is higher than the other. The width of the wall is granted the inhabitants of the courtyards of which it is at ground level. It's considered to be an extension of their courtyard. It's just part of their floor space. The rationale is that since it is easily accessible to the inhabitants of the courtyards and more difficult to use for the inhabitants of the other, it is granted to those for whom it is easily accessible. Okay, so who owns the land rights of the top of the wall? The person for whom it's ground level. Similarly, if there's a trench between two courtyards, there's 10 handbreadth deep for the courtyard on one side and at the ground level for the courtyard on the other side. The width of the trench is granted to the inhabitants. Again, of the courtyard which is ground level, the rationale is the same. Since it's easily accessible to the inhabitants of this courtyard and more difficult to use for the inhabitants of the other, it is granted to those for whom it is easily accessible. Tazayin. The following rules apply when there's a wall between two courtyards that is lower than the upper courtyard but higher than the lower courtyard. So it's not exactly ground level. During the week, the inhabitants of the upper courtyard may make use of the breadth of the wall by lowering articles to it, and the inhabitants of the lower courtyard may make use of it by throwing articles onto it. On the Shabbos, the inhabitants of both courtyards are forbidden to use the wall unless they establish a single Eidov. They both need to share it. If they do not establish an Eidov, it is forbidden to bring articles that were left on the breadth of this wall into the homes, nor one bring articles from the home to the breadth of the wall. In other words, the wall is a no-man's zone for the duration of Shabbat. The following rules apply when there's a ruin that is a private domain between two houses. If the inhabitants of both houses can use the ruin by throwing objects into it, each one causes the other to be forbidden to use it unless they establish an Eruv. Okay, so there's a construction site in between two houses. Common story. No one's really using it. So, if both can access it, then neither can use it. It's easy for the inhabitants of one house to use the ruin. The inhabitants of the other may not throw articles into it because it's deeper than their domain. It is granted to those who can use it more easily, and they may use it by throwing articles into it. In other words, it can be considered an extension of their domain. Yudches, kol gagas here. All the following are considered to be parts of a single private domain. Firstly, all the roofs of the city, despite the fact that some are high and some are low, all the courtyards, all the enclosures that were enclosed for purposes other than dwelling, and are each less in area than required to sow to saw. The breadth of all the walls and all the lanes of which we may carry, because either a post or a beam has been erected. Okay, so a wall or a roof or a gate of a private domain is considered a part of the private domain. Full stop. One may carry articles left in one of those areas to mention Shabbos to one another without an Eruv. One may not, however, transfer articles left in the homes to these areas unless an Eruv is made. What do we mean? Ketzad. When an article was left in a courtyard at the commencement of Shabbos, whether the inhabitants of the courtyard established an Eruv for themselves or whether they failed to do so, it is permitted to take the article from the courtyard to the roof, to the top of the walls. Afterwards, it may be taken from the roof to another Jefnus to it, even if the second roof is higher or lower than it. From the second roof, may be taken to another courtyard, from the other courtyard to a third roof, and a third courtyard. From this courtyard, may be taken to a lane, from the lane to a fourth roof. Indeed, one may carry throughout the entire city through the courtyards and roof, through the enclosed areas and roof, or through the courtyards and the enclosed areas, or through any combination of these types of areas, provided one does not bring this article into any one of the houses in the city. The latter is forbidden unless all the inhabitants of these different areas join together in a single Eruv. So essentially, if everyone joins together in a single Eruv, which is what, for example, C Point has, then you can carry everywhere, even into the public domain. Conversely, if an article was located in a house at the beginning of Shabbos, was later taken to a courtyard, it may not be taken to another courtyard, another roof, top of the wall, to an enclosed area, unless the inhabitants of all the areas to which the article passes join together in a single Eruv. So what we're essentially saying is that the Chatzeros connect to one another. Chaf Aleph, Boir Shebein Shtei Chatzeros. A cistern is located between two courtyards. It is forbidden to draw water from it on the Shabbos, unless a partition 10 handbreadths high has been erected so that everyone will be drawing water from his own property. Where should the partition be erected? If the partition is above the water, it is necessary that at least 1 handbreadth of the partition descend into the water. If the partition was constructed within the water, it must project a handbreadth outside the water so that one domain will be distinct from the other. So you actually have your area that you take from. Similarly, if a beam 4 handbreadths wide has been placed over the mouth of the cistern, one may fill his bucket from this side of the beam, and the other may fill his bucket from the other side of the beam, although the water is not divided below the beam. It is considered as one portion of the system was separate from the other, and this is a leniency enacted by the sages with regard to water, which, if you remember, we read about somewhat also in terms of the laws of Hitzah. In order to make water accessible, these provisions were put into place. Gimel, when a well lies in the midst of a path between the walls of two courtyards, The inhabitants of both courtyards may draw water from it. There is no necessity for them to extend projections to the wall. This ruling applies even though the well is more than 4 handbreadths from each of the walls. The rationale is that the presence of a colleague's domain does not cause a person to be forbidden to carry when he is lifting an entity through the air. So in other words, the airspace is not a reason to prohibit it. The following rules apply when the wall of a small courtyard is broken down, opening the courtyard entirely to a large courtyard before the commencement of the Shabbos. The inhabitants of the large courtyard may establish an area for themselves, and they are permitted to carry, for portions of their wall still remain standing on each side. The inhabitants of the small courtyard, by contrast, are forbidden to remove articles from their homes in the courtyard, unless they establish a single eruv together with the inhabitants of the larger courtyard. In other words, what we're seeing here is definitely that the larger courtyard is the primary space, and the smaller courtyard needs to be deferential to it. The governing principle is that the dwellings of the larger courtyard are considered to be part of the smaller courtyard, while the dwellings of the smaller courtyard are not considered to be part of the larger courtyard. This principle sometimes establishes itself in community politics as well, where the residents of smaller communities are considered to be members of the bigger community, but the members of the big community don't necessarily consider themselves to be members of the smaller community. I see Constantia can relate to that phenomenon. Chaf Hey. When two courtyards have established a single eruv together through a shared opening or window, and that opening or window was closed on the Shabbos, the inhabitants of each of the courtyards may carry within their own courtyard. And this, by the way, goes back to something which you spoke about in the laws of Muktzah, that something which is in a permissible state when Shabbos comes in stays that way, and vice versa. If it's prohibited, it stays that way once Shabbos comes in. Since carrying was permitted for a portion of the Shabbos, it's permitted for the entire Shabbos, meaning the unity, the collective that was created, does not go away. Similarly, if the inhabitants of the courtyard have each established a separate eruv, and the wall between them fell on the Shabbos, the inhabitants of each courtyard are permitted to still carry within their original area. They may each take articles from their homes and carry them to the point where they could originally come up until the wall. The rationale, even though the wall's not there anymore, the rationale is that since carrying is permitted for a portion of the Shabbos, permitted for the entire Shabbos, same as in the previous halacha. Although the number of people in the courtyard has increased, the increase of people in the Shabbos itself does not cause carrying to be forbidden. In the instance mentioned in the first clause, if after the opening or window was closed on the Shabbos, the window was opened inadvertently or an entrance was made, or Gentiles made an opening on their own volition, it is again permitted to carry from one to the other, even then it would be open again because it was permitted when Shabbos came in. Similarly, if two ships were tied to each other and an eruv was established between them, it becomes forbidden to carry from one to the other if the connection between them is severed. This ruling applies even if they're surrounded by the petition. If the connection was reestablished inadvertently, it is again permitted to carry from one ship to the other ship. But I did mention in terms of the hotel, so just to point out that wherever you're going to be going on holiday, if you're staying in a hotel and you want to be able to carry into the shared space of the hotel, you do need to make this eruv chatzeros, irrespective of what kind of courtyards there are. And yeah, depending on the conditions of the hotel, are there other Jewish residents, what the management is like, etc., you can work out the details. Any questions? Well, good. Okay. Have a beautiful Shabbos.
Thank you.
John,
Good
David,
Shabbos, Rabbi.
Dennis, Jackie,
Good
Bert,
Shabbos.
Sev, Alfred,
Good Shabbos
Martin.
to you all.
Good Shabbos to you all. Mark, regards from your kids. I just had a beautiful morning with them, with Sam. All the best.
There's Jack.